see any reason why we can't go ahead and proceed. Today's committee meeting will be hearing only on HB 525. So I will go ahead and call the meeting of the House Regulatory Subcommittee of Regulated Industries to order. Before us today, we have HB 525. I understand we will be working off of LC 364660. At this time, I'd like to ask the author of the bill, Chairman Lim. Thank you.
Not quite a chairman yet, but thank you for that honor.
Forgive me. I am so sorry. You know what? I looked down and I had my notes from the previous meeting. Representative Lim, I'm just trying to bestow all kinds of accolades upon you today.
Well,
forgive my oversight.
Chairwoman Earhart, I will take it.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Chairwoman and members of this subcommittee, for hearing House Bill 525. Yes, this is indeed LC 364660. And what this bill does essentially is to require under the State Board of Funeral Service regulations, and the statute is to allow or permit the funeral director, require the funeral director to post their essentially funeral services pricing list online on their website. That is if and only if they actually have a website. And the purpose of this essentially is to increase access to information that at any point in the lifespan, all of us will be attempting to access. This is a very personal issue for me because something that I dealt with first 11 years ago when my own father passed away. I was the person in the family that was tasked with compiling this information. It's a very difficult time, of course, and that led me to my own essentially foray into end-of-life work. For the past 7 years, I've volunteered at Visiting Nurse Health System, and I actually have someone, Zena Regis, here with Symponia Hospice, who will testify as to the benefits in that setting. And for the past 5 years, I've volunteered with both the Memorial Society of Georgia and the Funeral Consumer Alliance of Georgia. And we have the president of that organization, John Lance, to testify here as well to the benefits of this bill. And really, I'll sum up by saying, to me, I tried to draw this up in a way that would be maximally beneficial to consumers, in a way that is also minimally burdensome to funeral directors and funeral services providers. I say maximally beneficial because, as I said earlier, at any point in the lifespan, many of us will be attempting to access this information, and a lot of us, especially in this age, will be attempting to do so digitally. And I say minimally burdensome for a couple of reasons, one of which is we also know that for a lot of these funeral service providers, it is not always easy to be providing this information over the phone. Under federal regulations, the FTC funeral rule, they are required to give it to someone in person, something called the general price list. But this would provide, again, this access that would help not only the consumer, but many funeral service providers. And it's also minimally burdensome because, again, because of that FTC regulation, there is already some form of this information that all of these providers are required to have. And at the same time, it's only, again, this mandate would only be on those that have a website. We're not creating a requirement to create a website in itself. If you have a website already, then you put that on there. And I will say, this is something a lot of folks are already doing. Of course, Chairman Collins with his funeral home, he very much has this information right on the front page of his website, and that's very beneficial to folks. And I'll close by saying this. Even though there is that federal regulation, to me this is very much a state issue. This is an intrastate commerce and consumer issue. And I would like to see the state of Georgia really leading the way on this issue, again, to provide something that all of us will have to access at some point during a uniquely difficult time. And thank you to members of this committee.
Thank you. Will you stand for a question or two?
Of course.
I had a couple myself. So my understanding is that the Federal Trade Commission and the Georgia State Board of Funeral Services already require these printed lists to be available, right?
The FTC does.
The FTC,
yes,
I was told the Georgia State Board of Funeral Services has that same requirement.
I believe in their regulations they refer to it, which does create a requirement in itself.
Okay.
But I cannot be 100% sure of that.
Okay, that's fine. And then just to follow up, if I may, certainly the website, the phone numbers are listed on those websites. What's to keep an individual who might be looking for pricing to just email or call and ask for a price list to be emailed to them? Why does it need to be on the website? For example, I shop online quite a bit. I own a business in Cobb County. My products are available online. But I'm just trying to find why is the need to have it actually present on the website? But I would tell you not from a funeral director perspective, but from a business person's perspective, there's a very good reason why I don't put my wholesale pricing on my website. And that's because I don't want my competitors to see that. But I certainly provide it to customers that call and inquire.
Right. So it really is about, again, this is a uniquely difficult time. And nothing is to stop a person from calling, absolutely not. But because this kind of cuts out not so much the middleman, but it cuts out a step. In this difficult time, it allows the consumers to access that information and puts them on the same page as the funeral service provider, because we know, or there are funeral service providers that will email it. Sometimes they do, but again, a lot of them don't necessarily have even that capacity. You may have a website, but not have an accessible email. We know this to be true for some folks. But beyond that, which is sort of secondary, it puts people on the same page, because when the consumer calls, you generally will have the funeral service provider sort of listing out something that is already on paper. And so by having this on the website available, it really literally puts them on the same page and makes it easier to have that conversation about pricing. Now, I did want to address briefly the competitor issue. Now, part of me is saying this is good for competition because of the transparency, but beyond that, I think that the greater point is that pricing this is already happening with a lot of providers. As I mentioned, Chairman Collins there. And because this is something that is already required for people to have anyway, it really is trying to make it as beneficial for the consumer as possible, despite what the chairwoman has said.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. Chairman Collins? Oh, I'm so sorry. 15?
Thank you very much. What we do in funeral service is so different than any other profession. 50 years ago, if you were to go around into Georgia, you would see that most funeral homes were owned and operated by, a single family. And as we have evolved in funeral service, you have more of a conglomeration that's come in. And I think that I speak for a majority of my colleagues throughout Georgia when I say this. Price is one of those things that's very sensitive to a lot of people. And as a professional in my community, I never want price to be an issue for people in my community. As we become more transient around the metro area, you have people that do call about pricing. And we try to extend services to those families in the community that we possibly can. Most of the time, I've found a majority of the time, pricing is something that's really an issue to families that have a hard time funding arrangements. I'm a little bit different than most. I started my business 19 years ago. I didn't have anything. I lived above the funeral home, had an old hearse, had an old flower van, and so pricing was very important to me. I wanted to differentiate myself from the rest of the crowd based on pricing. And as the business has evolved, you get a nicer car, you got to charge a little more for that car. Mm-hmm. You remodel the building, you add on to it, you have more staff, it just costs more. But again, you look at the cost estimates, you're there to help people. And the majority of the folks in funeral service are there to help people. You do have some bad actors along the way. As far as the requirements for your general price list, right now if a family comes in, we present them with a copy of the general price list. We have it there readily available in the room where we make arrangements. I put mine on my website several years ago, and it's very convenient. The one drawback I would say to putting your general price list out and making it mandatory, there's a large amount of funeral homes, I'm sure in the rural parts of Georgia, that do not have a website, period. So that's one of the drawbacks there. The other thing I can say as far as a consumer protection, we're very blessed and fortunate in Atlanta. There's a website you can go onto right now called Funeralocity. Is that right?
John, is that
Funeralocity? and it compares pricing and offers you pricing. I mean, they're proactive. They call the funeral home and they ask for a copy of your general price list, and they'll come get a copy of your general price list, and they'll price you accordingly. So as far as the competitive piece of it, that's really helped those families that are price sensitive for whatever reason. Some people just don't have the money and that can't pay. Others just don't see value in what it is we do, and shame on our profession for giving people that impression of us. But I would say that as we have changed and technology has evolved, the internet obviously has become more of a resource for families selecting a numerous things. But I do think that it's important that we look at this, and I would like to bring some other people to the table as far as the Georgia Funeral Directors Association, the Georgia Association of Morticians. I believe there are 2 or 3 organizations there that I think would be very good to bring them to the table and have some dialogue and discussion about that. The presidents of those associations, I think that would be vitally important. I can see the pros and cons here. I think that's very important to look at things from a different perspective. I see things from the perspective of when a family walks in my door, and the funeral rule is there, and when I'm inspected by the State Board of Funeral Service, I have to present the inspector with a copy of my general price list. So just so you know that the Secretary of State's office through the State Board of Funeral Service, they're looking at that each time they come to my facility. They're asking for that copy of my general price list, copy of my casket price list. So they're asking for those kind of things. But I do think that it would be nice to meet with some of these other organizations and get some feedback about that.
And I think that's a great idea. I just have a couple of responses, as I may.
If I could just interject for 1 second, I forgot to mention this at the beginning of our meeting. If I could have anyone who's going to be speaking to the bill today sign in, the sign-in sheet it's on the table right back here. If you have not already signed in, we want to make sure that we've got your name. Thank you.
One other comment.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've found has been difficult for me is when you do have a change in that general price list, it's hard to remember to go online and update that thing. I mean, we update ours on our printed material, once, maybe twice a year. But there for a while, I didn't even think about looking at the general price list I had online, and I got a call one day, and the families, this is what our price is. Where did you see that? And then of course we worked that out, and that was fine. But that's one of the difficulties I would see as a funeral director is your general price list got to be updated to reflect the one that you're giving out to the people that come in your door.
Absolutely, and I guess I'll go backwards. So that's absolutely correct. And I will say in this legislation, there is obviously a provision that would require the state board to promulgate rules and regulations, because this legislation very clearly, not only to avoid anti or non-delegation problems, but because I really do believe it should be up to that board to determine the strictures of the rule. It is not saying you must put the FTC's list. I believe it is the opportunity for this board to innovate and solve some of the problems the FTC has not been able to. With respect to Chairman Collins' suggestion about having the difficulty of updating the price list, I think that's something that the state board would be better able to solve than some national organization, the FTC, that isn't even just dedicated to this industry. So I think that would be part of my response to that. I think that provides an opportunity. And as far as, you're absolutely right, Chairman Collins, there are a lot of folks that don't have the website. And that's why this legislation is clear that if you do not have a website, this requirement does not apply to you. It really is trying to find that right balance again between providing as much to the consumer and providing something that isn't already provided in the state law without creating too much additional unnecessary burden.
And one other thing I just wanted to mention to you, and I think we could do a better job in government, and I've always said that. I had local government experience before I came up here, so just to understand that. But one of the things, if you look back and look at what the funeral rule did, while it did create a level of transparency that had probably been absent where funeral service is concerned, if you look at how much the cost of funerals rose after the implementation and the mandate of the funeral rule, I mean, there was a significant cost increase there because the burden of having to itemize prices, and it just caused the retail price of funerals to go up. I think it was 20-something%. I mean, it was very costly to the consumer. I'm confident that as far as pricing goes, competition determines a lot of that, and I think that the pricing aspect of what we do is becoming more and more relevant to the families that we serve. And just here in the metro area, just to give you an example, that Funeralocity website that gives you a cost estimate of each and every provider in a certain zip code, I think that goes a long way to shine light and add some transparency to the profession.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Can you educate me on the reason for the general price list and the reason why it's mandated
You mean
by
at
the FTC?
Gotcha. So the funeral rule really was implemented in 1984, in large part because of transparency. As Chairman Collins said, most folks in this business are hardworking and transparent folks, but there were definitely some, and continue to be as in any industry, some bad actors. And because, again, the FTC very much recognized what a special context this end-of-life consumer service is, they stepped in to act and create a special rule for this industry. So it really is a lot of the purposes of this bill is taking from that.
Follow up, Madam Chair? Do you know of any other profession that is mandated to have a general price list?
I do not. Either on the federal or state level, I would defer to my perhaps more learned colleagues on that, but I do not.
Well, I can tell you, we fall under a very different category. If you purchase a casket from a third party and you want to bring that to us or bring merchandise to us, we have to accept that. Now, if you go down to Kroger and you buy a steak and you go to Longhorns and you tell them you want them to cook that steak, what are they going to tell you? No. That's exactly right. So, we already fall under some pretty heavy regulation. And I don't know of very many other professions that have to give a itemized statement. And again, I want to say I see it from a different perspective, because what we do in dealing with families who've lost loved ones, it's a very emotional time. I mean, I remember what it felt like when I lost my mom 20-some-odd years ago. And you're dealing with people in a very emotional time, very vulnerable time. And I think the hottest places in hell are reserved for people that take advantage of folks during that situation. And unfortunately, we do have some bad actors, but a overwhelming majority of the people in my profession are good people. But I'm not aware of any profession that has to have an itemized price list.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the insight, too.
I do think at this point we probably want to move along a little bit. I know we have a couple people that want to speak to the bill. All of us here also have to be in another
Yes, please.
regulatory committee in about 15 minutes, so I want to make sure we have time to hear from everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker.
I'm slow, but I get there.
You just take your time there.
All right, good afternoon. I am John Lance, currently president of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of Georgia. Short time ago, I was president of the Memorial Society of Georgia and had other issues come up, and also rotated off of the board of the Funeral Consumer Alliance, the national organization, which comprises of about a little over 60 state and local organizations like the Memorial Society and Funeral Consumers Alliance of Georgia. The need for this bill is the convenience to be able to shop for those who really care about and need to shop for the money. And that's just the real core of it. It's difficult to go out and get the information if it's not online. Collins Funeral Home and Cremation Services has the information online. I think that's great. There are a large number who do not. The majority of funeral homes do not have their prices online. The funeral rule, and the funeral rule here, booklet complying with the funeral rule, put out by the Federal Trade Commission, took effect in 1984, has a sample of what the general price list is, has a large number of particulars, what it says, how it works, and requirements for that. And it's a 30-page booklet on complying with the funeral rule. So what it does is, specifically with the general price list that we're this primary focus of this bill, it says that the provider must give the general price list to the consumer in person before they can talk about the cost, and must give it to them physically to keep and tell them that. However, it does not require the funeral provider to put it online. It does not require them to mail it by regular mail. It does not require them to send it by email. So if you really want to shop, and shop for those who don't want to send it out by email or regular mail, then you've got to go physically in person. That is a whole different area. Now, and of course that's the purpose, the central focus of this bill. It was mentioned funeralocity. And funeralocity is a really great start. Great website, does a whole lot of really good things, but it's only a start. Example, one of the websites advertises a direct cremation for $595. Does not have its general price list on its website, and it will provide that service within 10 miles of the location of the provider, with a substantial charge for each mile after that. But that's not on the website. That's not in Funeralocity. There's another provider that I'm familiar with that provides $695 direct cremation in 43 different counties with no extra charge for the mileage. And they have their general price list on the website. So that whole, without putting down and saying Funeralocity is really great, but it doesn't allow to deal with those details, and complying with funeral rule and the requirement for the general price list requires that information to be on the price list. So that's one of the issues. For your question, why the funeral rule? The funeral consumer, by the very nature of the relationship, is currently uniquely vulnerable. That's just the way it is. There's emotion involved at the time, heavy emotion frequently. There is the lack of ability of convenient information. If it's not easy to shop, if you've got to go in to shop, you don't want to shop, you don't want to go in when you're healthy, because you're alive, and if you talk about death, you may die. So you don't want to talk about death. And so, and you put that together, the consumer is uniquely vulnerable, and that is regardless of whether that vulnerability is taken advantage of or not. That is the purpose and the situation of why the funeral rule was passed. Thank
I
you.
understand. Mr. Lance, thank you so much for your testimony. It's most helpful, and I appreciate you taking the time. And I do know we want to go ahead and move along. I believe we have another person who would like to speak to the bill.
Hi, I'm Zena Regis, and I'm a hospice chaplain and a bereavement coordinator with Symphonia Hospice, as well as a board member of the Memorial Society of Georgia and Funeral Consumer Alliance of Georgia. And I am thankful for the time to be here. One of the things I just wanted to add is that family, it's such a devastating and overwhelming and disorienting time to be caring for a loved one when they are entering the end of their life. And families don't want to be seen as nickeling and diming and shopping and trying to get the best price. And so even trying to get them to go into different funeral homes to even get the price list is really challenging. And so often we're at the bedside with our smartphones. And so it's really, really helpful just to have that information. I'll hear from families all the time, they have no idea. They're like, I don't know how much a casket costs. For them, it could be anywhere from $700 to $7,000, and it would all make sense because it's just something they've never purchased before. Similarly, they're like, I don't ever want to feel like I am trying to get the cheapest route for the person that I love. And so often hospice workers, we rely on the funeral homes that have it online just to make the conversation easier. And so it's just so helpful for hospice workers. And I think it also will be helpful for funeral homes because I'll say most of my colleagues really lean heavily on that when we're asked to provide our expertise or any assistance or support in that area. And like Mr. Lance spoke to, it's helpful to know there are lots of funeral homes that will say, this is the price, but for example, picking up a loved one, but then after hours, they'll add a cost. And so families are like, what is an after hours death? How do I do, they will have no idea to even consider that. So for those reasons, having a general price list on the website just is such a helpful thing, I think, for families and also for hospice workers and anyone who is caring, providing emotional support for those at the end of life. Thank you.
Okay, would you stand for a question?
Oh, yes,
Sure,
of
we
course.
have him. Chairman Collins.
Thank you for what you do. People always say, I can't do what you do, Jay, being a funeral director. I couldn't do what you do as a hospice nurse because you're dealing with those folks. You're there with them right after they pass with the family. I think that's very, very noble what you do there. I would say this, that there's a double-edged sword in a number of instances when you talk about the general price list.
Okay.
And I think Rick, my colleague there, probably agree with me. We can't charge any more than what that general price list says. But I can tell you that we've had situations where people call us and they're in financial dire straits, and we listen to their story. And like I said, local folks, we take care of our local people. And maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I can't tell you how many times people have called me and said, this is what I'm looking for. I don't have but this much to work with. And we try to work with them. So if you put too much faith in that online pricing, it can be a double-edged sword.
I agree. And I will say we have had excellent experience with a lot of funeral directors just helping to work within a budget. But often they just have no idea what that budget even is to begin with. So, but I am really, really grateful for the work that you do to make it work for people in such a vulnerable time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tell me who you are with again. You're a hospice chaplain and what?
Symphonia Hospice is the hospice I'm with, and also with a memorial. I'm a board member for the Memorial Society of Georgia and the Funeral Consumer Alliance of Georgia.
Memorial Society of Georgia?
Yes.
Where is that?
Our offices are here in Georgia. I mean, in Atlanta.
Okay.
But yes, here.
And what does Memorial Society of Georgia, do you sell cremations?
No, not at all. No. It's purely to help consumers with this end of life concern.
Okay.
No, don't sell
Okay.
cremation at all.
No,
I know there are lots of societies of Georgia.
Yeah.
That's what makes it
yeah.
confusing.
And
But no.
That's what you went through it so quick, I couldn't catch it all.
Thank you for the clarification. No.
But
No,
you
no
know
selling.
that you can walk in any funeral home and tell them on a price list and they have to give it to you.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, and like Chairman Collins was saying, in my little town, we get it all the time. And in my 50 years, the county doesn't pay us anything for indigents.
Mm-hmm.
That comes out of our pocket.
Yes.
You go to a drugstore, tell them you don't have money to pay for your prescription. You think they're going to give it to you? No. You go to a car dealership, tell them, look, I need a car to get back and forth to work. If you'll let me have it, I'll pay you. I promise I'll make payments. We get hit with that. So, and a lot of people don't understand what all that we do. When someone calls my funeral home, and either one of them, and ask, what is your price for cremation? We tell them, $23.35. And this includes removal from the place of death, transport to our funeral home, filing all the paperwork, and doing everything, performing the cremation, and returning the cremains to the family in a container. It's all inclusive, and it also includes an obituary on our website. And you can post pictures on it, have a guest book. It's a package. Now, when they tell us, like Chairman Collins said, we don't have that much to work with, then our next question is, what can you afford?
Yeah.
But you have to understand too now, if a funeral home finances over 10 funerals a year, then we come under truth in lending, and we all of a sudden have to meet all the qualifications of a bank. So that's when we wind up just giving services away.
Yeah.
And I don't, there again, my daughter's an RN, and I've been right there when hospice, and I've sat on hospice board getting them started. And I thank you for what you do, but I do know there's some hospices in the Atlanta area that are recommending to families, and they shouldn't. Call the funeral home, ask for the owner, ask for the manager. I need prices. This is what I'm looking at. And if you find a funeral home that is, and I do know of some that do not provide what the Federal Trade Commission requests.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to be turned in.
Mm.
You need to
Helpful to
file
know.
complaints to the Federal Trade Commission, because for every infraction, it's a $10,000 fine. Is that right, Jay? That's right. A $10,000 fine for each infraction, and just with one family. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, if I,
Oh, no, it's okay. I just, we have a 2:00
Right,
committee meeting that
okay.
we need to get to.
but, turn them in, the funeral home, and when you call them, don't just, as Chairman Collins said, don't just rely on the price on the website. And if you've narrowed it down to a couple, call them and tell them your situation. And if you've got a financially distressed situation, call them and tell them, look, this family needs help. Somebody will help you, because I don't know of any human body that's lying, waiting on disposition. Somebody has always stepped up and took care of it.
Yes, and I just really want to say quickly, you have really highlighted one of the issues. Sometimes families will say, I've seen this cremation for $795, and then they'll call your funeral home for $2,300, not realizing they're not comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. They're looking at completely different
Right.
sets of what is covered. And
That's
so
right.
that's why it's so helpful to just see it sometimes in black and white and see that price that they think they're getting a good deal on
Yeah.
there with the additions.
Call them and ask them, what does that include?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can-
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to go ahead and wrap up simply because we
Thank
do have
you.
another. Representative Lim, thank you. And to both of our witnesses here, thank you for appearing today. I think there's a lot involved here. And we will, I'm sure, pick it up at another time. This meeting stands adjourned. How do you turn the whole thing?